Hello everybody, Adam Savage in the Armor Conservation Lab at the Metropolitan Museum of Art with Sean. How are you, my friend?
Doing well.
Dude, I always love days spent here, and we've talked about all sorts of different things, gauntlets, maces, swords, and today I believe we're talking tools.
We are talking tools again.
Given how much we have talked about tools, if you've isolated some, I feel like they're going to have some good stories.
Yeah, so this is an interesting group of tools. So when we formed our department, we were not just interested in collecting arms and armor, we were also interested in how they're made and the craftsmen. And so our first curator, Dr. Bashford Dean, did a lot of work trying to find armor makers and weapon makers who were still living out in the world. Right. And that really had fallen out in Europe. I mean, there were people, of course, making swords and armors, but not really those same unbroken chains like you might find, say, in Japan with swordsmiths. And,
interesting, of course.
And sword polishers and that sort of things. So sort of after World War I, there's more European involvement in the Near East, and he starts trying to find living craftsmen still working in parts of the world that he had otherwise had trouble accessing. So through an intermediary, he was even communicating with T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, to say, hey, in your area, are there any working smiths? Mostly he struck out.
Sure.
But one of the cool things is he went on a grand tour and wound up in Damascus where he found a Damascener shop and was able to purchase the full toolkit from that craftsman. So this is the toolkit of a gentleman named Khalil Sufi, who sort of took over his own father's shop. It was a large shop with several employees, and was able to sell him this set of tools.
I can't believe it's the single person's toolkit.
Yeah, I mean,
gosh.
There might be some spares he had lying around.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is the toolkit, and so we have written down sort of the name of the shop, the people, and his technique, and even right down to his blades here are made from recycled razor blades. So he's made them. They've been made themselves in the shop.
Oh wow! So he's taken a razor blade and hammered it into the shape he needs it, put it in his own handle. Can you walk me through the tool's rough functions?
Yeah. So let me explain Damascening to begin with. So there's a couple different ways to apply gold to something, or silver. Yeah. But let's say we're talking about gold. If you want an all gold helmet, and throughout the Middle Ages, what you would have done is you would have taken mercury and you would have dissolved gold into it. So the mercury just sucks up that gold, and it becomes something that's often described as like butter-like. And so you spread it over the surface, and then you can cook off the mercury, and it will leave the gold deposited on the surface.
That doesn't sound toxic at all.
It's horribly unhealthy, but it works. If you want something all gold, that's a great way to do it. Assuming you don't care about your longevity. However, it's not terribly accurate. Right? You're trying to work with something that will flow.
Right.
So if you have incised lines, it can stay in those lines, but it can come out here and there. It's hard to do really, really fine detail work. So here with Damascening, what you do is you are creating essentially a textured, a hatched pattern on the surface that will hold gold you can apply to it.
You're adding tooth to the surface.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the way you do that is you'll take one of these knives, and in a rocking motion, you sort of score the surface and you create a crosshatch pattern. So it can be 2 or 3.
Where you want the gold to land.
Sometimes very specifically where you want it. You can keep it really tight, or sometimes you just do the whole surface. It'll be completely gridded, and then you add gold wherever you want to. Different ways to do that. With the way they're describing it in the text, it sounds like he's doing it very localized, just where he wants it. So he creates this crosshatch pattern. And then let's say you're doing really fine, like little tiny gold leaves and coils, and you take this little hammer here, and you take a fine thing of gold, and you would just lightly tap it in order just to sort of key it in. And what you've got is when you've scored the surface, sorry, I should have explained this first. When you score a surface, you are creating a trench, and you are also pushing material up on the sides.
Yeah, we got a bank on the trench.
Yeah, and you do this a bunch of different ways. Now you've got all these sort of, trowels and little pieces coming up. So now when you push the gold into that, the gold is very soft, and it sort of gets bitten into.
Right.
All right, so that does your initial hold into it. Then you come back later, and here Khalil Sufi was using a burnisher here, used like a spoke shave. A lot of, in Spain, they might use a little actual, like a piece of steel or a piece of wood to like tap it down. But you do a much harder hit. And what this does is bends over the ridges you've created, and it sort of locks in. Everything's going in different ways, and now everything's joined together into that soft gold.
And so it makes the gold's attachment so it brings everything down into a more single plane.
Yeah, you're bringing that, so those upright burrs of steel are now bending over into the gold, and it's grabbing
and really
holding it onto
Okay.
it. So it is very thin gold. I mean, you're talking gold foil, gold wire. It's easy to remove if you're aggressive with it. However, it's in there, right? It's not coming out unless you go after it. And then these are not mentioned in the text, but these are chisels probably for inlay. So you're carving into the surface, dovetailing it, and then setting in thicker chunks of gold.
When you say dovetailing, you're carving into the surface, but also maybe making it even wider at the bottom than it is at the top, so the gold goes,
it spreads out underneath.
And so someone is using one of these to do like fine scroll work.
Yeah, you might do a phoenix. You know, we have upstairs, we've got one where you would have carved the outline of a phoenix in there, put a huge chunk of gold in, then used maybe a thicker hammer like this to then hammer that down. The gold spreads out into the undercutting. Now it won't come out. You can even leave it raised over the surface and then engrave the gold and have this really, sort of relief coming out of your, like gold relief, dragons and phoenixes or whatever you wanted coming out of it.
I love the adornments of the armorer's hammer, just the little details
little touches,
that make
just to make it personalized.
Theirs. Yeah.
And that may have been how, you identify yours.
Right.
Yeah, that's mine. I got the cross hatching on it. Yeah, and we even provided in it, because Dean was very serious about this, is the pen for doing the preliminary drawing on the object before going in and putting the gold in.
And this guy here?
Not mentioned in the text. It's with it. I have to imagine this is just for honking huge inlay. I don't know. It has the same file marks.
It's got the same patterns, yeah.
It's part of the group, but unfortunately the text is brief. About half of it is actually a description. So after he applies all this gold, you've scored up this metal surface. So you want a nice dark background to have the gold and the silver pop off it. He describes how Khalil and his people then darken the metal, but doesn't know the material they're using. So it's using like a dark earth from Lebanon, and they mix it with water, and it creates either something basic or acidic.
There's not enough information about
it. But it sprinkles it with the water and then wraps it in a cloth to keep the moisture on it, and then that brings back the texture of the metal is the line.
The handles here, the 6 handles that I can see are so beautiful. Like they're so evocative. There's splits, there's chunks, there's
how it widens. I like that a little bit. Like these aren't details you need.
No, and there's also like this is post-war, so this patina is actually kind of fresh for this building. But like the amount of handwork, the amount of the softening of so many palms. This thing is crazy. Do you have examples of Damascening we can take a look at?
I do have a few examples. So here we've got 2, and I'll just pull them out at the same time. So 2 Indian spearheads. This one is 17th century, and this one is 18th century. They're both made of crucible steel, so they have a pattern to them. And this is a good example. If you look very closely, you'll see that very, very fine cross hatching. They haven't done the whole surface. They've done just where they want to put the gold down. And so here you've got a little bit of file work, and then also probably gold leaf that they've cut out sections, laid it down, and then hammered it down. But you can make whole leaves just laying wire next to wire, next to wire, next to wire, next to wire, if you're quite skillful. And then once you hammer it and you burnish it all down, it looks like one piece. So I'm not exactly sure how they did that. But some of those are big enough that it might be just whole foil.
And when I'm looking at this gold, is that gold sitting on top of the cross hatching? Because is this one where it's actually going into a dovetailed channel?
So this is largely sitting on the surface. However, when you put in those initial scrapes, you are cutting in. So some of it will be below the surface, but really, it's mostly above.
So then this is really about the expertise of the person doing that final pass on the path that the gold is taking.
Yeah. It's the skill is the wire work.
Good.
You're sitting there just creating all these, foliage and geometric patterns.
So for something like this, they're not using gold foil necessarily, but maybe a fine piece of wire they're hammering
they're
flat
just, as they go, they're
around.
pressing it in.
Oh, God. Everything you're saying is making this sound more complicated and more intense in terms of the amount of work.
You have whole shields, whole suits of armor that are just from end to end in very intricate geometric patterns. I mean, just lunatic work.
Lunatic work. I really appreciate the bladesmith who decided to do this raised outer edge on. That's just showing off, isn't it?
And one of the details I really like about this one, so the tip gets reinforced.
I noticed that. It gets thicker out at the end.
Yeah, to reinforce it. So, when you're riding down your opponent, you've got a nice strong tip to go pierce his mail or whatever.
And then this guy,
which really is less about the Damascening and more about just the general metalwork.
The metalwork is so gorgeous.
Beautiful, the spiral.
Oh my God.
And this just the sort of the hollow ground tip that again, these, well, column fullers for lack of a better term, vanish, the last 2 inches of the tip. So you again have this really strong reinforced tip.
Oh, it is super beautiful. That cross section is perfect.
Yeah, so much meat there.
Oh my gosh. And this is this looks to me to be a sheet of steel wrapped into a tube, and then that pattern is added afterwards.
Yeah.
They're hammered in?
You'll see it's got you've got a braze line here.
Yeah.
And the reason you would have to do that with this is because it's made of crucible steel. If you got it hot enough to forge weld, you would ruin the pattern.
Oh, fascinating. Of course you would.
Yeah, so you have to sort of assemble these in pieces and braze them.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I'm really like, I had never quite understood this process before now.
Well, let me show you the masterwork here. Figure we'll stick with maces. So this is, just one of the finest European examples we have of this sort of intricate Damascening and kind of what can be done. So this is a mace made for the future King Henry II of France. I think he was the Dauphin at the time, by a Spanish swordsmith and Damascener who was in the employ of the French court. War broke out with the Holy Roman Empire, and he was booted out of the country and found his way over to England working for Henry VIII.
Oh.
Yeah, so guy had quite a career, but one of the beautiful things you can do, again, you can't do with mercury gilding, is using different metals. So you can have some things be silver, some things be gold. You could do copper if you felt like it. And he's known for doing this really intricate sort of battle scenes and just dense decoration.
It feels like there's almost no wear on this thing. It's just in such
pretty well preserved.
Beautiful.
I love it. You run your finger over it, you can feel the texture of that.
Yeah, no, it's super dimensional. And these little pieces being silver is crazy. Oh man. Do you have an idea about how long someone might have spent? Is there contemporary accounts of how long someone might spend doing a piece like this? Is it 6 months or 6 years?
It must have been in the months.
I would imagine.
If you know what you're doing, you can probably move at a decent pace. But the intricacy of this is just mind-numbing. There's people who do this to this day, so it's something you could find out. This is not a dead skill.
Okay.
Still people doing it.
Because I do think about it from time to time as I work on my pieces. This is, this is like there's so much effort into this thing that is meant to tear flesh apart.
Yeah.
Well, at least theoretically.
But as we were saying, maces have a symbolic purpose beyond their function as well, and symbols of command. And so to take the extra time to embellish something like this, it fits with the object.
It really does. And then every single side of each of these is a completely different scene.
Yeah.
There's no repetition on this that I can see. Oh my gosh.
And even obviously it's out because of the gold, but the shape of each of the flanges, the file work around the tip. Yeah, just a masterful piece.
I always come back to the idea that the amount of labor feels devotional, right?
Yeah.
It feels like the way I think when I see a prayer nut.
Yes.
That like the work was the point. The absurdity of the work was the point.
Absolutely. This was something you couldn't half-ass.
Right.
Right.
Gorgeous. Sean, the thing I love about this room is that it makes me feel connected to the makers of these pieces. And this is just like so cool that this comes from one person's workshop.
To know the name, to see photos, that's great.
Just incredible. Dude, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
What an education. I'll see you guys next time.